The Maasai Struggle for Land Rights and Dignity by Soleil-Chandni Mousseau. In the early morning of August 18th, the safari cars that usually creep along the Ngorongoro-Serengeti highway, slowed by their sheer number, encountered a different challenge. Thousands of Maasai men and women, draped in red patterned Shuka, clothed in waving grass, a symbol of peace, were blocking the highway. They were staging a peaceful protest against the Tanzanian government's latest ruthless attempts to forcibly evict them from their ancestral lands. The police, wary of using violence in front of international tourists as they had in neighbouring Loliondo in 2022, resorted to intimidation tactics instead, blocking vehicles carrying food and water for Karatu to Ngorongoro Conservation Area (NCA) to weaken the resolve of the demonstrators. Losing land and life, a historic of displacement in the name of conservation. Since Tanzanians colonizers established the Serengeti National Park in 1951, displacing indigenous residents to Loliondo and the NCA, the pastoralist Maasai in northern Tanzania have faced relentless struggles against evictions of human rights abuses. For the past 4 years, their resilience has endured brutal attacks designed to expel them from their ancestral lands, transforming the region into a people-free zone to enhance safari tourism and hunting as glorified in Western media like Planet Earth. The atrocities are masked as environmental conservation and protection. In April 2021, the Tanzanian government announced the Multiple Land Use Management Plan (MLUM), posing a grave threat to the Maasai's survival in the NCA. This allowed the March 2019 joint monitoring mission by the UNESCO World Heritage Center, the International Union for Conservation of Nature (IUCN), and the International Council of Monuments and Sites (ICOMOS), which urged the government to control population growth in the NCA. The government responded by prioritizing tourism revenue, enacting the MLUM and a settlement plan that expanded the NCA from 8,100 square kilometers to 12,082 square kilometers and created new restricted areas. In essence, this condemned nearly 80,000 Maasai to lives of destitution or death through forced evictions and the destruction of their livelihoods. In response to international condemnation, the government falsely claimed that Maasai were volunteering en masse for resettlement at 2 relocation sites, Msomera village in Handeni district and Kitwai A and B villages in Simanjiro district. Despite the government's claims that the Maasai's relocation is voluntary, they have been forcibly uprooted by the systematic denial of essential social services, including education and healthcare. The government slashed nearly half of the budget for Ndulen Community Hospital, the main healthcare provider for nearly 100,000 Maasai pastoralists in the NCA. The grounding of the Flying Medical Service in 2022, after 39 years of critical emergency care, left more than 24,000 children unvaccinated, deprived more than 5,700 pregnant women of necessary medical attention, and halted the delivery of life-saving HIV medications. While no official count of fatalities exists, it is undeniable that lives have been lost as a result. Disfranchisement and punishment, the latest attack. In August, after failing to forcibly remove the Maasai from the NCA, the government struck a severe blow to their political rights. Ngorongoro division was removed from the voters' register, disenfranchising tens of thousands of Maasai pastoralists before the upcoming local and general election in 2025. Those registered to vote saw their polling stations moved hundreds of miles away from Somera village, the site of their forced relocation, effectively stripping even more Maasai villagers of their rights to vote. Adding to this assault of their political rights, Government Notice GN 673, issued on August 2, 2024, delisted 11 wards, 25 villages, and 96 sub-villages in Ngorongoro Division, affecting more than 110,000 people, all without obtaining their free, prior, and informed consent. The blatant violation of their rights sparked the August 18th protest, where Maasai residents demanded the reversal of GN 673 and the restoration of their electoral rights by the National Electoral Commission. As measures of the Maasai, armed with grass and placards demanding justice, went viral on August 22, 2024, the Arusha High Court temporarily suspended GN 673 pending further instructions. However, community lawyers have condemned the ruling as a sham. The court's decision followed an injunction supposedly filed by Ngorongoro resident Isaiah Ole Posi, who denies any involvement. Allegations have surfaced that the government paid the lawyer who filed the injunction against itself in a calculated move to direct international attention sparked by the protests, holding those responsible accountable. While the Tanzanian government must undoubtedly be held accountable for violating the rights of its citizens, we must also scrutinize the role of two other key actors. The first are international conservation bodies like UNESCO, IUCN, and the COMOS, under whose influence the government's multiple land use model and resettlement plan were developed. It took an extensive global campaign to shift their stance. UNESCO's website carries the government's February 2024 report on the conservation status in the NCA, providing the false narrative that the relocation of communities is voluntary, adheres to international best practices, and includes compensation measures. Yet, it also notes concerns from communities, acknowledging the need for human rights-based approach. If designating areas like the NCA as World Heritage Sites endangers the survival of indigenous peoples in African countries, UNESCO and IUCN's outdated, colonial and top-down approach to conservation while boosting tourism must be dismantled immediately. As for the international tourists who continue to flock to Tanzania, lured by the chance to witness the Big Five or hunt trophies, the August 18th protest should serve as a wake-up call. The Maasai protesters and their global supporters have made their message clear. This is no longer a scene from out of Africa. If there is no respect for indigenous lives, then it must be tourism out of Tanzania. Soleil-Chandni Mousseau, a senior at Head Race School in Auckland, is an intern scholar at the Auckland Institute since 2020. This is an edited version of the original article published in Common Dreams. On the other hand, grandstanding Netanyahu elevates land grab above long-term peace. The priority of Islamic resistance movement Hamas has always been to elevate the suffering of the Palestinian people. Since October 7th last year, our priority in negotiations in Doha and Cairo has included ending the genocide against Palestinians and ensuring the return of Palestinian and Israeli captives to their families. However, the priority of the occupation government and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the talks is the total seize and control of Gaza, not prisoners. The 6 Israeli captives who were killed recently, as well as many others killed by Israeli bombs, could have been released alive months ago in a deal. However, Netanyahu's insistence on long-term occupation of Gaza, including the control of the Philadelphia corridor, the strip of land between Gaza and Egypt, including the Rafah border crossing and the Netzarim corridor running east to west across Gaza and splitting it into two, is the main reason the Israeli prisoners are going home in body bags. When Netanyahu was asked to choose between the Philadelphia corridor and the release of Israeli captives, he was unequivocal. Philadelphia is more important than the prisoners. For Israeli, these are not negotiations for a ceasefire or prisoner exchange, but an opportunity for a further land grab. To date, several Israeli captives in Gaza have been killed by the occupation army's bullets and bombs. Throughout these many months of ceasefire negotiations, Netanyahu has shown a determined disinterest in concluding a real deal to end the genocide and get Israeli prisoners back to their families. He could safely have brought all the Israeli captives back in their prisoner swap, as happened successfully last November when over 100 Israeli and foreign captives were returned by the resistance in Gaza. Instead, Netanyahu deployed the occupation army to repeatedly bomb entire towns, refugees living in tents, hospitals, universities, school, refugee shelters, including those run by the UN, and, in one case, to massacre more than 100 people to retrieve 2 or 3 captives. If Netanyahu really wants to exchange prisoners, Hamas is ready. Hamas has demonstrated flexibility and already made major concessions with the aim of reaching a real prisoner exchange deal, stopping the aggression and war, and ending the suffering of the people. On behalf of the resistance, Hamas initially asked for 500 Palestinian prisoners to be released for each Israeli soldier held captive and 250 Palestinian prisoners for other Israeli captives. Netanyahu's government rejected this, and Hamas compromised by greatly reducing the number from 500 to 50 Palestinian prisoners from each female soldiers and from 250 to 30 Palestinian prisoners for each Israeli civilian. The vast majority of the Palestinians being held captive in Israeli jails, hundreds of whom have been tortured and scored maimed while in detention, are also civilians. Many of them are not even involved in politics. How did Netanyahu respond to Hamas's compromise? It began a new invasion in May and stormed the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. The crossing is still closed, and humanitarian aid cannot freely enter Gaza except through Israel, where Israeli genocidal racist civilians routinely attack aid trucks while their soldiers look on. On May 29th, U.S. President Joe Biden announced a ceasefire deal he said had originated from Israel. Hamas welcomed the plan, and the U.S. proposed UN Security Council resolution that flowed from this. Hamas, the resistance group, believed that the plan created a very real opportunity for a breakthrough and an end to the genocide taking place in Gaza. The U.S. government and even some leaders of the Israeli occupation government welcomed this development. All parties expected an agreement, but Netanyahu's right-wing government responded by intensifying the attacks on Gaza and backtracking on previous agreements. In February, Netanyahu insisted that 50 Palestinian prisoners who had been serving life sentences, if they were to be released in a prisoner exchange, must be deported. In July, he raised the number of 150 and thereafter announced that no Palestinians with life sentences would be released, even if they are sick or elderly, thus contradicting previous Israeli proposals. Hamas remains committed to achieving an agreement to end Israel's genocide in Gaza, allow our people to return to their destroyed homes, and allow the possibility of them rebuilding their homes and their lives. But such an agreement is possible only if there is a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, including from the Philadelphia and Netzarim corridors. The Israelis allow the unhindered reconstruction of Gaza and the return of the millions of displaced Palestinians and an end to the crippling Israeli siege imposed on Gaza since 2007. The release of Israeli captives must take place within the framework of an agreement that also ensures the release of thousands of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Palestinians can't be expected to ask for less than this if we are to release Israeli captives. But Netanyahu refuses. He does not believe that the lives of the captives is worth this. He would rather sacrifice Israeli lives than make a deal that allows people in Gaza to live. Palestinians, on the other hand, are determined to continue our struggle for our liberation from the occupation and its colonization and ongoing genocide. To resist the occupation and colonization is a right we have been granted by international law, a right implicitly reaffirmed by the International Court of Justice in July. Imad Sabar is the director of the East, Central and South African regions in the International Relations Office at Hamas. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the views of IOL or independent media. And that's it from Egypt's Africa. Stay tuned to our USA political updates.